Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is Dr. Paul Zak, who is a professor at Claremont Graduate University and is ranked in the top 0.3% of the most cited scientists in the world, with over 180 published papers and over 19,000 citations to his research. His over 2 decades of research have taken him from the Pentagon to Fortune 50 boardrooms to the rainforest of Papua New Guinea. In this episode, we explore the fascinating intersection between neuroscience and emotional fitness. Recent studies have found that having a fulfilling social life is more crucial to overall health than quitting smoking. However, in a world where one third of the Americans report feeling lonely, the significance of emotional connections cannot be overstated. I hope you enjoy our conversation about ways you can build greater emotional fitness into your life. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Well, today's focus for this episode, I really wanted to talk more about emotional fitness and the benefits of really focusing on that for your health. Because you state there's a lot that we have around sleep, exercise, and diet, but rich social connections we're not looking at near enough. And you even make the statement that having a rich social network is more important than quitting smoking.
It is. Recently, just 2 weeks ago, the World Happiness Report came out from Oxford, and it showed that about 50% of our life satisfaction, our happiness over time, is due to the quality of our social relationships. And so I'm going to put the question back on you, Charles. How good are your social relationships?
Not good enough. I know that a lot more people, I'm an introvert by nature. The pandemic, I think the loneliness has gotten worse. I mean, I've seen studies of a third to even more of the American population suffering from loneliness, which really, we need to take more effort into building these strong social connections to have a more meaningful life and a higher quality life.
Good news from that, though, is that the brain is very promiscuous in the way it absorbs social emotional information. So I can watch a movie and get a lot of social value from that, even if it's not a real interaction. I can play with my dog and get neurologic value from that. Um, Humans, of course, are richer, right? I'm going to have a longer conversation than I will with my dog, who just kind of barks at me. And so I think what we've done in the last 6 months since we last spoke is actually build an app for emotional fitness. So we've shown in published research that we can quantify how much social interaction you need in order to build up your emotional fitness to be psychologically healthy. And so I'm using this word fitness and not wellness because wellness sounds like either well or unwell. But we know just like physical fitness, we can build up our emotional fitness by connecting to others, spending time, having valuable social experiences.
One of the misnomers, too, is that stress isn't bad. I mean, emotional fitness requires stress and recovery, just like physical fitness does as well. So you see that with first responders that are trained to perform while physiologically aroused. You see that with a lot of different other professions, right? So stress and arousal is not inherently bad. We need that in order to improve our fitness, especially at an emotional level.
Right. So these peak immersion moments, this high value, high neurologic value experiences are very metabolically costly. So just like working out to make you stronger and more cardiovascularly fit requires physiologic arousal. When I'm engaging with other people, if I'm not physiologically aroused, if I don't have high immersion moments, then they're not very valuable to me. So that's the way we can quantify this using an app, pulling data from smartwatches and applying algorithms to that. So again, it's not that I want to avoid stress. I certainly want to avoid chronic stress. But for most of us, when I see this high arousal response, physiologic arousal, it means, hey, this is important. I'm doing this thing. Now, I should be able to shed that arousal, fairly rapidly. Most of us do. If you are so stressed out that you've not been able to sleep for 2 weeks, okay, that's a different issue. You've got chronic stress. But the flip side is also not healthy. If I see people who are so disengaged in life, they're socially withdrawn, it's a very strong predictor of mental health disorders. And actually, a variety of medical disorders are preceded by slow social withdrawal. So, by having a measure and learning about where your baseline is, we've shown that when you get too far below that baseline, then you're starting to get depressive symptoms. And that's a great time to reach out, call a friend, If you need to, call a therapist and really think proactively about maintaining your emotional fitness.
Let's remind our listeners again. I know we've touched upon it in the prior two episodes, but just go through the concept of immersion. It's that neurologic state driven by two neurochemicals.
Right. So, how do we value social emotional experiences? Something my lab's worked on for 2 decades. And what we found by doing just tons of published research that you can go to Google Scholar and find and read for free is that this valuation network in the brain has two core components. One is I've got to be present, right? This experience is not valuable if I'm distracted, looking all around, and that presence is associated with that binding of a neurochemical dopamine to the prefrontal cortex. So I'm looking at you, Charles, right? I'm really focused on our conversation. But the second component is this experience has to be sufficiently emotionally compelling for me. So I call that emotional resonance. It's got to generate this resonance in me. And emotions are how the brain tags an experience with value. And so when I have this presence, dopamine and oxytocin that says, oh, this is valuable, I'm really connecting to Charles, having a great time, my immersion is high. And when I have these peak immersion moments, it's kind of like training, running on the treadmill. I'm becoming more cardiovascularly fit. Now when I have peak immersion moments, enough of them, I'm training my brain to be more present, more connected, and building up my emotional fitness. The punchline here is once something inevitably unhappy happens in my life, something bad happens, I have built up this buffer. So now I'm not going to have depressive symptoms. I'm going to have all of these humans around me that I can call. So the most effective way to build your emotional fitness is to connect to others.
Well, how about if you're an introvert, and I know you are like myself, it takes effort to foster these new social connections. It gets easier over time. But is there any tips, tools, or strategies, or what have you done to really get out of your comfort zone and build this network so you're more emotionally fit?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I'm a big introvert and I can stay in my lab for 12 hours, not talk to anybody and be totally fine. But, I believe my own research. And there's this saying that all research is me search. So, maybe I like the social connection because I had my own issues. But what I started doing is running experiments on myself. So, three easy suggestions. One is find an extrovert and they will just talk to everybody. And so they'll just bring you in. So, my wife's an extrovert, bless her, and she knows 4 million people. And anytime I have a question, hey, do you know a good? And she, oh, yeah, I know a plumber. Yeah. I know." So, find an extrovert who can do the work for you. The second is, as you said, Charles, begin to train yourself. So, I have, as an experiment on myself, started to talk to people in elevators just to see what happens. We're in a box. I know there are other humans. Why am I pretending there are other people there, right? So, what I found is about half the people have a wonderful conversation with them for 30 seconds. And then I just get used to sort of talking to strange people. And the other half are freaked out. And that also sort of makes me happy for some reason. Like, come on, you're a human. I'm standing next to you. It's all good. I think the third piece of advice is something I've kind of famously done for many, many years, which is to facilitate greater social connection by, again, being present, being emotionally open. But I do that also by hugging people. So when am introduced to someone and they put their hand out, I say, "Oh, I don't shake hands. I hug everybody." Now, who do you hug? People you like, your friends, your family. And so I'm basically hacking their brains to convince them that I'm someone they like, and therefore they want to talk to me and connect to me. So, I have a famous TED talk where I, at the end, randomly hug someone in the audience. And what you haven't seen in that video online is the TED experience. This is from 2011. The whole thing went crazy, and the place shut down. Everyone started hugging each other, and the whole conference stopped for about 10 minutes. It just went nuts. And so, yeah, so I recommended 8 hugs a day. I mean, it's a simple thing, right? Get enough people that you connect to and care about. But it's really an investment. So for me, sorry, you asked a short question. I'm giving you a long answer. But for me, I really had to almost schedule it because I'm such a weirdo nerd. Like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I see these close friends at least every 2 weeks, go to dinner with them, go to happy hour, go to a movie, whatever that is, so that I'm making sure that I actually am investing in those relationships. And what we found in the published literature is that you don't need a lot of that, but you need highly valuable, so peak immersion, this kind of high value experiences. It's not that and I have fewer friends than my wife, but I have a lot of very powerful, strong, association, strong attachment to my friends. So I call these the 3 a.m. friends, right? This is the person you call at 3 in the morning and say, "Hey, I've got a body. Bring a shovel. Don't ask questions, and they'll show up." That's a joke, but people you can call in the middle of the night with a crisis, and they will show up for you. And actually, all you need is a couple of those. 2, 3 of those is enough. And so, for listeners who may be a little bit lonely or worried about emotional fitness, again, it's not quantity; it's quality.
And that was my next question, preference on quantity versus quality. I think people are starved for that connection and just an embrace. I mean, with the last 3 years, you would be amazed. I mean, it just amazes me to see just a simple gesture of kindness or a hug of affection, just what that can do.
Yeah, it's amazing. And also there's real value. You have gray hair like me, Charles. When you get old enough, you can just tell people you love them, and that's okay, like your friends. It's totally fine. It's not weird. I had lunch yesterday with a very dear friend who I don't see very often, who's I don't older than me. Said his name is Mashi. "I love you, Mashi." And he goes, "I know, I love you too." Well, that's wonderful. As a friend, it's not weird when you're old enough. If you're a 22-year-old guy, it feels weird, but really, let the people around you know how valuable they are. And by the way, we've done research on video conferencing and phone calls. They're actually pretty good. In-person connections, you have more bandwidth hitting your brain, so you're more likely to have a peak immersion moment, better attachment. But this kind of Zoom conference is not bad. So if you can't physically go see these people, seeing them is actually the best. And then video conference is next. And then email or text or phone call is kind of further down the list in terms of quality and neurologically.
And the quality of your social relationships also can reduce risk of certain diseases like dementia, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we don't know the direction of causation there. So people with early dementias, also Parkinson's, autoimmune diseases, they begin to withdraw. And it's not really clear to themselves necessarily that they are not behaving the way they used to behave. So often a spouse or friend will go, "Hey, I think you should get checked out." So again, what we've done is create an app that's free that people can map their own emotional fitness. And when they go below these thresholds, then they can alert somebody or talk to a clinician, or just make a change, take a vacation with a friend or a family member or whatever that is. So I think having that inside knowledge objectively of kind of where I am is really important, and perhaps Charles, maybe more important for introverts.
Absolutely. I don't think many people realize this, but it really boils down to building high quality social relationships increases your happiness and joy, even for introverts. I mean, once you get past the initial phases of
It's even better than that. Even for the most selfish person in the world who wants to extend their health span, right? How long you live a healthy life, you've got to invest in relationships. So even if you don't want to kind of connect to others and give to others, if you want to be happier and healthier, you've actually got to invest in relationships. And it does get easier as you get older, I think, particularly for men. So we've shown that high levels of testosterone, which, are highest in males between 15 and 25, inhibit this desire to socialize, right? It's much more about dominance and competition. And so, again, there's a reason women live longer than men. Social connections also improve the immune system. So, we learned this in COVID, right? That sure, people can infect us with whatever viruses, but also that social connection is a real boost to sustaining high levels of immunity. So we don't want to just be totally isolated and never go out because that degrades our own physical abilities.
have you found any surprising connections between emotional fitness and other areas of life, such as decision making or something that you didn't think was related, but it definitely would impact it?
Oh, great question. We found that people who are more emotionally fit are actually more productive at work and more satisfied with their jobs. So again, I think we should be careful in the direction of causation because it's a correlation, and we don't know which is causing which. It could probably is bidirectional, right? So, this famous Gallup finding that the biggest indicator of your productivity is, do you have a best friend at work? So there's no work you and home you. There's just you. And so when we can go to work and be our authentic selves and form those relationships, then yeah, a lot of our friends. I mean, I don't know about you, Charles, but when I go to dinner with my friends, we talk about work most of the time. Sometimes personal things. My wife always laugh like, "Well, how is the person's wife or kids?" I'm like, "Oh, we didn't talk about that at all. We talked about work." So, but if you love what you do and you're excited about it, that's a fine way to have a social connection. So it doesn't have to be talking about your feelings. It doesn't have to be, crying and whatever. It can just be sharing and having that sense of connection. Activities are also wonderful. So, one of the things we have found that's surprising is that physical activity, if I do something physically together, that it really increases the degree of connection and immersion. So, that could be dancing. We've done experiments at folk dances, taking blood before and after to look at what folk dancing does to your brain, but it could be any activity, taking a walk. I have a friend coming in from Finland tomorrow. I'm going to go hike with him and my dog. Well, why? I could sit and talk with him for 2 hours, but if we're moving, your physiology, your brain becomes synchronized. And this is a guy I really like. I don't see very often because he lives far away. And so that hike is going to be a much more valuable experience neurologically to me and probably to him than just sitting on our butts having a coffee.
That's fascinating. Are there any misconceptions about emotional fitness that you have commonly encountered?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions is that you can't build it, right? And that's why, again, I really focus on this word fitness. Our brains are very flexible. So even you and I, who are introverts, I've trained myself to be a better connector. I've trained myself to be warmer because that's how I sustain relationships. So, um, given your innate personality, we can still modify that. And so, there are many settings in which we can get better. And I think that's finding the right people. And sometimes that's coaches, right? So, in the business world, we call that coaches. In the private world, we might call that a therapist. And so, yeah, if you're having trouble connecting, there are people who have attachment disorders, but yeah, diet, exercise, sleep, awesome. And this emotional fitness is really important. By the way, the fifth is having a sense of purpose. We didn't talk about that, but really kind of getting a sense that what I'm doing here on the planet is valuable to others, to the planet itself. And so that could be volunteering. And so as my kids have gotten out of the house, I finally have time now to have a hobby. And so I've been volunteering for stuff I do, which is outdoors and helping out. And you're surprised how many people are just, they know you're a volunteer and you're like, I clear trails for hiking. How many people stop and just chat with you and like, you're so nice to do this. And I'm like, I like the exercise. I like being outdoors, but now I have this social connection as well.
How about for emotional intelligence? How does that relate to emotional fitness? Is there an overlap there? Especially in terms of empathy. I mean, I assume there is because you connect better with others when you're more emotionally intelligent, and having that empathy really helps. But have you found a strong correlation there, or is there any insights that you can provide between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So again, kind of emotional intelligence is our ability to really understand the emotions of others and be open emotionally. And so we look at the neurologic. So that's kind of a survey measure, self-report measure. And emotional fitness is a neurologic data stream. So they're certainly closely related, in particular because the core component of emotional fitness is oxytocin, which is this social connection molecule. And so what we'd like to see is that as you become more emotionally fit, you also become more emotionally intelligent. And you said the key word, which is empathy. So if I'm going to invest in relationships, it's got to be that I'm interested in you, I give to you, not that I take from you. And we, particularly when we were younger, we all had these relationships that were kind of lopsided. That like I just give and give, and I just don't get anything. Like we go to lunch or dinner and you talk 90% of the time about yourself and I don't get to share the conversation. I'm like, it's not really a friend. That's I don't know. I'm just a dresser you're talking to. I'm not, part of the conversation. And so I think, those to me, though, you got to cut those out. And that's okay. I think it's, we all change and evolve over time. So that emotional intelligence, I think, is the kind of the precursor to building up emotional fitness.
And how we haven't really differentiated this, but kind of talk to me a little bit about how does it differ from other aspects of mental health? I know it impacts different aspects of mental health, but perhaps just a few ways in which it's different so we can kind of differentiate the two.
Yeah, it's almost the flip side of depression, right? If I'm emotionally fit, I feel relaxed, I feel confident, I can interact with others, I have these close relationships. What we see in depression is, again, social withdrawal, right? I don't want to engage with others. I want to lie in bed and not talk to anybody. What is perhaps surprising is that people who are emotionally fit are actually more relaxed. Even though I'm expressing or expending metabolic energy in my connections, we actually dump that quite easily. And so we see this kind of low levels of anxiety in people who are emotionally fit, whereas people with depression have high anxiety, right? So it seems like depression is a low physiologic state, but actually it's high physiology, right? It's an anxiety disorder. You are so stressed out, you don't know what to do, so you just stop. And that may be a good thing to do for a week or two if you're really having kind of a crisis. I need to just stop. If it persists for a month or two, then again, I think professional help is warranted. So think of emotional fitness as the kind of antidote to mental health disorders. So I'm going to build up that emotional fitness. So again, if I have a low point, I'm not below this threshold where I really have the symptoms of depression or anxiety. I'm building up this emotional fitness to keep myself above threshold. And we publish those thresholds, by the way, neurologically, and so people can find that published research.
And you even liken it to that emotional fitness is the steps for the 21st century. So people count their steps every day on their watches. This would be equally important and good to do if they did that on a daily basis as well through this wonderful app. So perhaps you can kind of unpack how the app measures emotional fitness and how it should be used.
Great question. So the app is called Tuesday. It's free. You can go to besttuesdayever.com and download it. Version one's out now. It's for iPhone only. Version two we're building right now would be iPhone and Android. You need some kind of wearable, Whoop, Apple Watch, Polar. We don't really care what it is. And it's quantifying from the cranial nerves, the output file of the brain, how much peak immersion you're getting. And we've shown in published research you need at least six of these peak immersion moments, these big waves of oxytocin that last long enough and are high enough to build up your emotional fitness to avoid these kind of depressive symptoms, stay above threshold. And so six is easy, right? Six waves. And this is for 3 minutes or longer above a threshold that is part of the app. And so think of, six people or six activities you can do a day that are going to be really valuable to you, whether you use the app or not. I think that's a great way to kind of make this easy. As you said, like steps for the 21st century, make it super easy. Got to do six things for 3 minutes that are really powerful. And those don't have to be social necessarily. I spoke to a wonderful coach in the UK earlier today, and she says when she uses the Tuesday app, and that every day in the morning she says, "I feel safe, I feel happy," and then she throws her hands up and says, "I'm full of joy." And she says, "My immersion peaks, and I feel like my day is starting." Now you can do that by yourself, right? It seems a little bit, weird maybe, but if it's helping your brain really be open and emotionally connected, who cares if you do it by yourself, in your bedroom? So anyway, I think there's lots of things you can learn. The app also connects to your calendar so people can identify themselves privately. What gives me the peak immersion moment and which stuff should I stop doing because it's just not very valuable to me neurologically? And that may be people or activities. But there certainly feeds back to work as well, Charles, right? So, as we said earlier, if I'm more satisfied with my life outside of work, I'm a better employee and vice versa.
Or even scheduling your day around those. If you've had a really draining meeting and you've identified that from the app, you can know that you need to recharge before you go into something else. It just makes it a little bit more deliberate on your part to try to have those peak immersion moments more frequently during the day. In terms of accuracy, what are you seeing in terms of accuracy in measuring immersion?
So, again, this work was funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, which replicated our work some years ago and confirmed it. And we've got some of the largest companies in the world. I'm probably NDA'd from mentioning them, but almost all the professional services organizations. Accenture has been very public about this. By the way, the breaks is really an important point. So Accenture has found that it's about 20 minutes before you need a break. 20 minutes of high immersion means you got to do a little 5-minute recharge. And so, think about getting up, get a glass of water, go look out the window. Again, we've all been trained. We're all at a high level. We've all been trained to be able to sit on our butts for 8 hours a day, never move, but doesn't mean your brain works at that frequency. So really think about that 20-minute rule and then having some moments for yourself. So I just schedule this in. Like the gym, I schedule on my calendar, I schedule writing time or creative time. I just schedule it. So you can just do that. If you're again super nerdy like me or you get just caught up in things and you get too busy, schedule a little downtime for yourself and I think you'll be happier, you have more emotional fitness and honestly you're going to be a better colleague and a better partner for those around you.
Well, we do that with our company, having the 20-20-20 rule for our learning sessions, 20 minutes of learning, 20 minutes of interactive activities and a break, just because, like you said, it's your brain can't sustain those peak immersion levels for very long. And over time, it's just going to limit what you can absorb or assimilate from any learning event, whether it's reading a book or going to a training.
Exactly right. And again, you're trying to optimize here, right? Doesn't mean you can't do it forever. It's like traveling. And when my kids were little, I always said, you can stop anytime for snacks or bathroom. Like we're here to have fun. We don't need to push through this. So let's do it at the pace that works for us. And by having an app like Tuesday that you quantify, am I getting enough neurologic value from these activities that I can begin that modulation process?
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Zach, today. I always like to leave our listeners with what's that one call to action? I know they're going to download the app, but if there's another call to action to build their emotional fitness moving forward from today.
Here's my suggestion. Every day, tell one person you know that you love them. How about that?
Wonderful advice to leave the episode on. Thank you again for joining me. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
You can go to getimmersion.com. Happy to return emails. Anyone listening here is going to be a friend of mine. So reach out if you've got questions.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.